Let's imagine something simple. You're not feeling okay, you haven't slept for weeks now, your motivation is through the floor, you decide that you should probably talk to someone. And then you hear about two different professionals, a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And suddenly, a river of questions flow into your head. Are they the same thing? Is therapy really just talking? If I see a psychiatrist, does it mean I'm crazy? These questions are more common than you think, and the confusion is completely valid. But psychiatry and psychology are two different approaches to the same problem. One doesn't replace the other. In this video, we're going to break this down clearly and systematically. We'll look at what each professional actually does, how their diagnostic processes differ from one another, when collaboration between both is ideal. By the end, you'll know exactly where to start, what to expect, and how to make a decision. Be prepared, friends, because this is gonna have tons and tons of information. Let's begin.
JD Salinger presents Hollywood stars and celebrities. What do they know? Do they know things? Let's find out!
The first two sections in this video will be flooding with information and comparisons, so if you feel a bit overwhelmed, it is okay to pause the video or rewind a few seconds if there's anything you want to review. Making a decision like this can be hard, so it's worth taking your time to truly understand both approaches. So before we compare diagnoses or treatments, let's slow down a little and answer a simpler question. What does each professional actually do? And let's start with the psychiatrist. The main difference between the two is that a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. That means they go to medical school, just like a cardiologist or a neurologist do. They are trained in physiology, neurology, pharmacology. In other words, they are trained to understand how every system in the body, including the brain, function, malfunction, and respond to medication. When you meet a psychiatrist, they evaluate your symptoms through a medical lens. They're asking questions like, what symptoms are present? How long have they lasted? How severe are they? You can think of it like this. Imagine your emotional responses have volume controls. Sometimes the volume is turned way up, anxiety feels overwhelming. Sometimes it's turned down and motivation disappears. Their interventions aim to help stabilize that intensity. Their main tools include clinical interviews focused on symptom clusters, prescribing medications when appropriate, adjusting dosages, monitoring side effects, all that kind of stuff. If symptoms are intense, destabilizing, or biologically severe, psychiatry plays a critical role. Structured, evidence-based behavioral therapies are most commonly delivered by psychologists. Speaking of which, let's see what a psychologist does this time around. Now, a psychologist is not a medical doctor. You'd be surprised at how many psychology students get disappointed when they find out they need to assist medical school in order to be a psychiatrist. Their foundation is not medicine. It's the science of behavior. That means they're looking at what you do, when you do it, what happens before it, what happens after it. If psychiatry helps you modulate that volume knob to stable levels, psychology teaches you new ways to maintain it that way and prevent it from destabilizing again. Psychologists ask questions like, what triggers these patterns? What avoidance cycles are operating? And their tools include behavioral assessment, functional analysis. This means examining antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. Instead of altering neurochemistry directly, psychologists work through learning experiences. They increase adaptive functioning by changing how a person interacts with everything and everyone. Both professions address mental health, but they intervene at different levels of analysis. Neither replaces the other. And now that we understand what each one does, we can look at something even more interesting, and that's how do they diagnose? The way you define a problem determines how you treat it. When you first meet with a psychiatrist, as we established before, the process usually begins with symptoms. They'll ask questions like, what are you experiencing? How long has it been happening? How intense it is? They're gathering pieces of a clinical picture. If a certain number of criteria are met for a certain duration, a diagnosis is assigned. For example, persistent low mood, loss of interest, sleep disruption, fatigue, and impaired functioning for a defined period of time may meet the criteria for major depressive disorder. At that point, the working assumption is medical. There may be an underlying biological dysregulation contributing to all these symptoms, so the next step often involves medication designed to target them. Antidepressants for depressive symptoms, mood stabilizers for bipolar disorders, anxiolytics for severe anxiety. The overall aim is stabilization, reduce symptoms intensity, and regulate the biological system. It's a structured linear pathway where you identify symptoms, assign a diagnosis, treat biologically with medication, and then monitor the improvement. Now, shifting to the process followed by a behavioral psychologist, when you sit down with them, diagnosis does not begin with symptom labeling. It begins with analysis of behavior. Instead of asking only what symptoms are present, the psychologist asks what behaviors are occurring, in what context, how often, under what conditions. Instead of beginning with what disorder is this, they begin with how is this pattern operating? And this is called functional analysis. For example, when I was a kid, I used to panic during school presentations, and the day it was my turn to present, I would skip class entirely and go somewhere else. What happens immediately after? It usually gave me relief, and that relief reinforces avoidance, which made me skip school pretty frequently. The psychologist is mapping this loop: context, behavior, consequence, repeat. Instead of prescribing medication, the psychologist designs interventions to modify avoidance, reinforcement patterns, exposure tolerance, emotional regulation skills. Instead of regulating biology directly, psychology modifies behavior-environment interaction. So, at its core, psychiatry asks what biological condition is producing these symptoms, and psychology asks what behavioral processes are maintaining this pattern. I know up to this point it has been a lot of information, guys, but trust me, now that we've gotten out of the way the main differences between the two, everything else that comes after is much easier to digest and understand. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, so which one is better? But a more fitting question would be, better for what? Let's start with psychology. If you work with a psychologist, you are going to learn skills: how to face anxiety instead of avoiding it, how to rebuild structure when you're depressed, or how to regulate emotions in real time. Therapy isn't just talking, it's practice. Like any other skill, like drawing, like learning piano, singing, dancing, it needs practice and exposure. Over time, instead of reacting automatically to anxious or depressive emotions, you gain more options. And because you're changing daily patterns, not just symptoms, the changes tend to last. You're functioning differently. And that's huge for relapse prevention. But psychology also has limits. If someone is in a severe maniac episode, actively psychotic, or in an acute suicidal crisis, therapy alone is often not enough. And therapy cannot directly change neurochemistry. It works indirectly through behavior and environment. Sometimes that's enough, and sometimes it isn't. Now let's take a look at psychiatry. Psychiatry can stabilize fast. In certain conditions where we are dealing with psychosis, severe bipolar disorder, extreme suicidality, medication isn't even optional. It can be life-saving. Psychiatry has something psychology doesn't, which is direct intervention into the biological aspects of our body. But here's the other side. Medication can reduce symptoms, but it doesn't actually rebuild your life. It doesn't teach you how to face situations that cause extreme anxiety. It doesn't restructure daily habits that have been destroyed by depression. It doesn't repair relationships. And even when symptoms improve, if the person's behavioral patterns don't change, the same problems can resurface again and again. Psychology helps you change how you live. Psychiatry helps stabilize the system when it's overwhelmed. One builds skills, one regulates intensity, one restructures patterns, One can protect safety in urgent cases. They are not interchangeable, and when used appropriately, they become collaborators. And what does a collaboration between the two look like? Let's take a look at that right now. When does it actually make sense to combine psychiatry and psychology? Think of it like this. If someone breaks their leg, you need to stabilize and fix the bone first, but then you still need physical therapy in order to walk properly again.
You're not gonna hurt me again?
I am not going to hurt you.
Okay.
In mental health, it can work in a similar way, and together, they increase long-term stability and regain autonomy over a healthy routine, literally tailor-made for you alone. Let's review just a couple of short examples to see what these look like. Going back to depression, someone who is severely depressed, they are usually barely sleeping, getting out of bed feels almost impossible every single day. They feel hopeless most of the day and cry very often. At that level of intensity, even starting therapy can feel overwhelming. A psychiatrist may prescribe an antidepressant and maybe something else to help regulate sleep. If the medication works, the person might notice slightly more energy, more emotional range, and better sleep. Just enough to get you back on your feet and start working on the other side. That's where therapy becomes powerful. Now a psychologist can help the person slowly rebuild structure, creating a daily routine, reconnecting with meaningful goals, learning how to respond differently to hopeless thoughts. The medication can remove a huge weight off your back, and therapy teaches you how to walk once again. Together, the chances of relapse drop significantly compared to medication alone. I personally tried this approach for years, and I'm happy to say that 2025 was one of the hardest years for me, but even after all the crazy and challenging things that happened from the very beginning all the way to the very end, I did my best to maintain my productivity and life balance. I did have a lot of bad days. I felt sad in a lot of them, stressed, felt like life was being extremely unfair, but I didn't let that destroy my will to keep moving forward. One of the good things that happened is that I stopped taking my medication because I felt I didn't need it. And with approval of my psychiatrist, I stopped. You would think that in one of the hardest and most tiresome years of my life, I would need the medicine more than ever, but it was quite the opposite. I learned to confront stressful situations and lots of adversity thanks to therapy. And therapy was especially effective thanks to the medicine by keeping me stable during my learning period. Without skills, medication is not enough. And without stability, skills can be very hard to use or even very hard to learn. And when applied together, they reinforce each other. It's not about choosing sides, but more about understanding what each tool is designed to do. Some people need one, some people need both. And knowing the difference should be empowering and getting you one step closer to seek the assistance or help you deserve and want to receive. So, how do you know when should you consider adding a psychiatrist and when should you consider adding a psychologist? Here are some clear indicators. You may need a psychiatrist if you're having persistent suicidal thoughts. You need medical evaluation and safety planning. Another one is if you're experiencing some kind of mania, like very little need for sleep, racing thoughts. Another one, which is actually one of my most recurrent issues, is if you haven't slept properly in days or weeks. Severe insomnia alone can destabilize mood, thinking, and emotional control. If sleep is severely disrupted, psychiatry support can be essential. If therapy with a psychologist feels impossible to even engage, stabilization may need to come first. And the other way around, you may need to add a psychologist if you're on medication and your symptoms have been reduced, but your life hasn't actually changed. If avoidance still dominates your decisions, like you keep canceling presentations or you keep escaping discomfort, you haven't learned concrete coping skills. If treatment so far has only focused on prescriptions and check-ins, but no one has helped you practice new ways of responding to stress, emotions, or thoughts. Therapy fills that gap. The next one is the most common one. The one I hear everyone talk about is that you relapse every single time you stop medication. Medication helped you get stabilized, but the structure underneath didn't change. Long story short, if intensity is the main problem, psychiatry may need to be involved. If patterns are the main problem, psychology needs to be involved. And if both intensity and pattern issues are present, then that's when collaboration makes the most sense. Now, just before we end up the video, there is a clip I want to share with you. Something I saw back around 2015, when I was like 22 or 21 years old. A clip that made me review the daily life I was living.
When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me. And since then, for the past 33 years, I have looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something.
And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. I try that. I still do that. And it was until that moment that I realized how unhappy I was with my life. I was on 4th semester of my psychology degree, and I decided to stop assisting and started to learn music production on my own every day with online free courses and resources. I felt better, but something was still missing. That's when I decided to seek more guidance and professional help. After some time, that led to the creation of my song Endure and went back to psychology school once I was better. Sometimes, watching a simple video like the speech by Steve Jobs can make us take crazy decisions toward improving our mental health. And there is no weakness in needing medication. There is no weakness in needing therapy. There is no weakness in needing both. Needing mental health support is not a personality trait, it's a strategy. And the more clearly you understand what your options are, the more empowered you are to choose what actually helps. Thank you so much for making it till the end. If this clarified something for you, please click the subscribe button. I make content for artists and people who want evidence-based mental health information. And I love to hear from you. Before watching this video, what did you think the difference was between a psychiatrist and a psychologist? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you in the next one, and keep on keeping on.